All right, we are live, right?
I believe so.
Yep.
We are live. Hello, and welcome everyone today. I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's session. We're so excited that you took some time out of your busy day to jump on and learn more about SOC teams, how they utilize offensive security tools, and their techniques for operations. Before we begin, I got to do a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session is going to be going for about 45 minutes. We're going to leave some time for Q&A, so you'll definitely want to stay for the Q&A, trust and believe, because we have two experts on the ones and twos. Drop your questions any point into the chat, but especially the Q&A section. If you drop it into the chat, we'll push it to the Q&A for you. But drop your questions at any time. We're going to be bringing up questions. This session is completely live and all about you and sharing this amazing knowledge. This webinar is being recorded, so be sure to check out for the link later. That's going to be hitting your inbox, assuming that you registered. And I'm very excited for today's session. I'm so excited for today's session because there's two people that I really, really love. One is our first guest, and then two is the brand that is putting all of this together. The brand is Picus Security. If you don't already know Picus, you're in the right place. But I'm joined by John Hubbard, who is a expert at offensive security, but also is heavily involved with up-leveling the next generation of cybersecurity practitioners. John, would love for you to take a second to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Ron. So my name is John Hubbard, and I do a number of things, all revolving around the world of security operations centers. So my main role is I work with the SANS Institute. I'm their cyber defense curriculum lead, which means I help coach authors and find classes and do sort of things like that. But also, as part of that, I'm a senior instructor there, and I am the author of two security operations centers related classes: Sec 450, which is a SOC analyst class, and another one, which is a LDR 551, is a class for SOC leaders and managers. So wrote a ton about this topic. I love talking about it. It's one of my favorite things. I've been a SOC analyst, a SOC manager for years. That's my background. Taught a lot of other courses on it. And I also run the Blueprint podcast, which is a podcast on really just talking with experts in the security operations field. So this is what I live and breathe every day and love talking about, spreading best practice around how organizations can defend themselves.
Love it. Love it. Appreciate that, John. Next, we have John also, but John Yüceel from Picus Security. John, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I work at Picus Security as their security research lead. I have 10 years of experience in offensive security and threat intelligence. I am a fan of John's work and your work also, and I contribute to cybersecurity field with my research. If you are familiar with Threat Report and Bird Report, I'm one of the authors of it. So yeah, happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And I see the chat is going off. Please, if you don't mind, drop where you're joining in from the chat. I'm here in Austin, Texas. John, where are you both at?
Philadelphia.
Philly.
Yeah, I'm in Turkey, the capital of Turkey, Ankara.
Hey, we got Turkey in the building. There's also a few other people in the chat that are from Istanbul. So shout outs to everybody. We got Dallas in the house. Keep the chats coming. Also, as mentioned, drop any questions that you have as we get going. The first topic that I wanted to bring up and get you all's take and feedback on is rethinking penetration testing. I think, for anyone that is learning about offensive ops, the first thing that you really hear about is pen testing. And when I first got into cybersecurity, pen testing was amazing because it was the only way to validate your security controls. Otherwise, the attacker did that for you. But now we have, so many different pen testing services and opportunities and products, but it's a compliance checkbox. A lot of us that go through our first pen test, we're doing it out of a necessity to stay compliant, maybe to get cybersecurity insurance. But attackers are cheaters. They don't play in the rules. They go outside of the scope of penetration tests typically would allow a pen tester to go through. And I think that creates a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a dilemma. John, I wanted you to help unpack this a little bit. Where do we stand on pen testing, and is scope playing a sticky situation?
Yeah, certainly. So there's a lot of things to unpack there. I mean, the main one here for this topic is this. We love pen testing. It is very, very useful. It tells us what is possible in a lot of cases, but it only tells us that for right now, right? It is a single point in time assessment. And so if you think about it, right, like what are the things we do every day, and does that line up with how we actually protect ourselves and our property, our homes, things like that? One of the things we had in some of the promo, banners we had out there, I tried to compare this to like locking the doors and windows in your house, right? Like that is something you would check, and you do probably every night before you go to bed, when you leave the house, things like that. You wouldn't lock your doors and check that your doors are locked once a year, right? Why? Because the environment is changing around you, right? People are walking in and out. People are opening and closing windows. Your family might be doing it. You don't know. You leave the window open on the front window and you leave the house, right? Someone can walk right in. So it's one of those things where like certainly it is useful to do at a point in time. That's way better than nothing. But what is even better is having a continuous view of what's happening. And on any enterprise network of really any size at all, right? Everything is constantly shifting, especially when you get into cloud and infrastructure as code and like things that are just super ephemeral, bringing up containers and, various resources, SaaS applications, platform as a service, like all this stuff is like, it's there, it's not. New people are bringing in new services and new applications all the time. And so if you don't have like a perfect handle on those things, you never know what might spin up. And when something spins up, it brings software. Software has problems. And if you don't know about those problems, you now have a ticking time bomb sitting there for you. So we have to figure out a way of like, not just checking once, but really continuously checking as much as we possibly can, getting some kind of footprint and ideal of like, what's really out there from an internal perspective, from an external perspective, and from a variety of data sources. So we have a continuous idea of what our exposure is.
One of those terms that is like coming up over and over again, and Gartner is really pushing us to pay attention to this keyword, is continuous. You mentioned one time a year, John, is not enough. I agree. I think one time a year is way too infrequent. And I would have PTSD when I was a security architect, when I would get asked, hey, what was the findings of the penetration test? And that was 6 months ago. I don't remember. And now I'm kind of giving you information based off of details that happened 6 months ago. It's not the best feeling, especially if it's something as sensitive as a pen test. John Yüceel, I wanted to throw it over your way. Does traditional pen testing have other challenges just beyond the scope from your vantage point?
You both explained greatly. Pentests are a snapshot of your security posture at a certain time. However, two major factors affect that. First one is who is taking the picture. The second one is where are they pointing the camera at. The first challenge is good pen testers are always on high demand. They are hard to come by, difficult to train, and difficult to retain on your side. And also their services aren't cheap. So if you want to take a snapshot of your security posture, you want the best of the penetration testers. However, they are not easy to come by. And also, you are defining a scope to their tests. So visibility depends on the test that you allow on your environment. So they are not going out of scope, and however, the attackers do not follow the scope. So they exploit whatever they can find and not something on you wrote on the contract. So that gives us the snapshot that you defined. However, maybe your attack surface is much larger and they can exploit whatever they find outside of your pen testing scope. So it's a snapshot. However, it depends on who is taking the picture and also what's the visibility on that.
One of the things that always rings true about scope in my heart, especially working for the fintech industry and also been a consultant for healthcare organizations, is, when you're doing any type of offensive operation, let alone even defensive, implementing a new control, what the most sensitive assets are off limits. You're not allowed to test them. You're not allowed to modify them and validate, and that could cause serious issues when you're dealing with the real threat. Especially, when you look at hospitals, being hit by ransomware, not being able to restore because that was out of scope during a pen test is devastating.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a big problem. I've heard so many stories about that. One of the things that like worries me most in that is like a lot of ICS and OT equipment, which is known to be very fragile, right? So it's like, oh, you can, scan this other stuff, but don't touch the thing that might cause real physical damage, right? If something were to happen to it. Yeah, absolutely. That's a concern.
I used to pen test some military equipments in the factory and in my previous work, and you are not allowed to touch manufacturing stuff, the OT stuff. So you might break it, and there might be some vulnerabilities, and there's no alternative for such equipment in a short time. So they do not want to touch it it under any condition. So you leave it as it. However, if you are facing an adversary that is targeting that kind of environment, you should validate against that. You should be ready against that. So it's not an out of scope for adversaries or attackers.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about an offensive SOC, because I think that is a newer paradigm that organizations have the opportunity to benefit from. But, just like with anything, it's a strategy, it's a mindset, it's a foundation. So wanted to just open that up and get both of you all's definition on what an offensive SOC means to you all.
Yeah, I can start on that. So there's a couple ways that an offensive SOC could potentially look, but there's one kind of core nugget of that idea, and that is making sure that you know about opportunities to attack your network faster than the attackers do, right? And there's however you lay that out, right? You can have the pen testers look for that. You can have blue teamers look for that. One of the more obvious ways that have been written about in the past is basically using the monitoring infrastructure that you have in place to pull in all the traditional like sources of logs that you may have, and then adding additional visibility that's going to help answer the question, where are there opportunities and vulnerabilities for attacks that the pen testers can use as a trigger to test a specific kind of problem that may or may not exist, right? And the idea is if you're getting this continuous telemetry and things that are coming in, then if you can look for baseline changes, if you can look for creation of administrative accounts that have maybe too much privilege, or new accounts that have any privilege at all that maybe shouldn't be there in the first place, things that don't have multi-factor auth enabled, right? Those kind of things are all like the cracks in the wall that a good attacker is going to find, right? And so if we can find those things before they do, and then have our pen testers, red teamers, or whatever you want to call them, validate those problems and then get that information back to us, then we can just react that much faster, right? And so it becomes like a more continuous like source of where we might be able to find a problem. And it's something that a lot of SOCs haven't done as much in the past. We're focusing on like, looking at specific incidents that might be happening right now, but looking for problems before there's an incident, that's a little bit of a different thing. And so that's kind of the core piece of offensive SOC.
It almost reminds me of threat hunting, taking your defensive team to actively hunt threats. But in this situation, it sounds like it's more so exposures and vulnerabilities that may affect critical systems.
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned that. So one of the things I was talking about in class when we're talking about threat hunting is not only tracking down and making metrics around what you found that actually was an active problem at the moment, but suggestions that you're making on things that could have become problems, right? And so that's something that, yes, a lot of SOCs with threat hunters and people who are threat hunting may be kind of doing along the way. But again, threat hunting is not something that every SOC is even doing on a continuous basis. I wish they were, right? That's a whole side conversation. I love ranting about that. If you're not doing threat hunting, please do it. But, right, this is a more dedicated, continuous, and ideally automated process where we have found out, like, what are the data sources that would tell us if this was happening? So we don't have to wait for someone to threat hunt and hopefully find those opportunities.
For sure. So, Mr. Yüceel over there, I would like to get your perspective on, this idea of the offensive SOC. I know that you and the Picus Security team, you all work with organizations on the full spectrum of what is now known as continuous threat exposure management and validation as well. So what are some of the things and tasks and activities that an offensive SOC may have?
Actually, John explained greatly. Offensive SOCs try to understand what can we do before attackers identify our vulnerabilities. Let me share the slide. And in the offensive SOC model, SOC teams are asking about whether we can detect or prevent certain vulnerabilities and threats in our environment, and are our security controls are working as intended, as designed. Assume that you are working at a bank and your firewall vendor is disclosed a critical vulnerability, a product that you use every day. However, in the traditional sense, the traditional SOC teams would respond in a defensive checklist. They review the advisory, confirm that the exposure is in their environment and the vulnerable assets in their environment, and monitor for IOCs and wait for the patches to be applied. And released and applied. However, in the offensive SOC model, the mindset shifts different completely, and you should ask preemptively that whether I can be exploited or not, whether my firewall can be exploited or not. Rather than relying on the vendor guidance, the team actively maps the exposure to specific assets, analyzes the vulnerabilities, whether it can be exploited or not in the context of their environment, and determine that the existing controls like segmentation and other rules can prevent such exploitation. And this is the difference between the traditional approach and the offensive approach. In the traditional approach, you wait for the information to come to you. However, in the other side, on the offensive side, you take the initiative and the test in the environment you have before attackers do, before other vendors release their patches and other stuff.
We're getting some good questions. Keep this up. We're getting some good questions from the audience. They're asking, this kind of sounds like purple teaming. What's the differences or even the similarities between this and purple teaming?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one if you'd like. So there are a lot of definitions of purple teaming, right? I know from talking to a lot of people in various organizations that everyone has their own kind of tweak on that language. So I'll caveat all of that with this. But in my experience, the way that I have run purple teams and the way that I see a lot of people also run purple teams is this, right? In a purple team assessment, you are having a very intentional and key here, still point in time assessment of what is going on your network. So an example of a purple team, like a exercise that I've done in the past, we say like, hey, we are worried about the attacker's ability to deliver phishing email, run unexpected executables on the device, and then steal data and get it out the door, right? So what do we do about that in a purple team test? We say, well, we need to find some red teamers that can act as an attacker. And then when they are doing that, they are going to come with a whole toolbox full of every single thing that might be done for the stages that we are specifically trying to test. So we might say, like, show up with 50 different versions of a phishing email, like everything that you have ever done. We want you to be exhaustive about this. So every single file type, every single way that you can hide a link, right? Try all that stuff. Same thing with executables, right? We want to try scripts, we want to try executables, we want to try living off the land, everything there. And then what about exfil? We want to try a whole bunch of different protocols, a whole bunch of different websites and things like that. And so, at least in my experience, a purple team test is a massive, exhaustive, intentional point-in-time assessment against a large group of test cases effectively, right? But it's still real methods because you got pen testers, red teamers, whatever, actually running that. Whereas the offensive SOC thing is we are detecting in real time on a continuous basis changes that might indicate the ability to attack, and then sending that to the pen testers and giving that information to them so they can say, hey, here's something we might want to check, right? Like right now today is a little mini micro test and validation and thing that they can verify and then let the SOC know, additional detail on if necessary.
Yeah, I would imagine that with the offensive SOC, there's a lot more identifying, investigating, rather than the actual of like doing the validation. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Actually, in both sides of the red teaming and blue teaming, we are trying to connect both sides. With purple teaming, we are trying to communicate red teamers and the blue teamers and try to come up with a scenario that we can improve our security posture, both in defensive and offensive capabilities. With Offensive SOC, we are trying to bring together blue teamers and the SOC teams with offensive capabilities, because cybersecurity it should be approached as a whole. So whenever you try to do some blue teaming, you always get informed about the red teaming stuff, and you learn about the offensive capabilities on the other side. So with purple teaming, we are doing it by campaign by campaigns, or with offensive SOCs, with offensive SOCs, we are trying to do it more continuously. So in the SOC teams, traditionally they are blue teamers. However, we are trying with offensive SOC, we are trying to incorporate more offensive capabilities, more red teaming capabilities into the SOCs itself.
Got it. Keep your questions flowing. The chat is giving a lot of comments on their perspective of what an offensive SOC that term means to them. And I can't imagine having an offensive SOC without having the right set of tools. One set of tools that I got introduced to early in my career was Metasploit. Metasploit allowed me to do some of those offensive operations. It's a oldie but goodie. Some people still use it, but now there's a lot more robust and developed and mature ways to do things like offensive operations, penetration testing. And one of the key terms and domains is breach and attack simulation. So where does breach and attack simulation fit into this paradigm of offensive SOC, John Yüceel?
You mentioned Metasploit. In the Metasploit, we have a library of threats, and you select one and deploy it. And in that sense, you are the operator of the tool, but the tool itself is deploying the offensive capabilities and try to deliver the payload and try to exploit the vulnerable assets. With the breach and attack simulation, we are trying to do that automatically. Let me share the screen. And in this sense, we are trying to, with breach and attack simulation and automated pen testing tools, we are trying to mimic adversary action step by step with the infiltration, with the exploitation, and lateral movement and other stuff. In each step, we are simulating what Metasploit is doing while you are operating it. However, with the breach and attack simulation, and the breach and attack simulation tool is doing it automatically. You select whether you select the threat to be simulated, or you do it on the autopilot with automated pen testing. Once you click on start simulate, it does the whole kill chain on its own. So it's much more automated in that sense.
So let me jump in with a question for you actually on this one. Could you give an example of what someone might expect to see if they were running a breach and attack simulation tool for testing, like the ability to deliver a malicious email? Like what kinds of tests are being run, and how do those things get automated?
With the emails, we have two different approach. For the first one is delivering a malicious payload, like an attachment. The other one is sending a malicious link. With that initial access tactic, we are trying to test that whether your secure email gateways are able to detect malicious attachments or malicious link within that email. For example, we attach a ransomware sample on that in the simulated email case and try to bring that email into your environment. If your security controls are configured correctly, it should be able to block that malware delivery. It's one of the initial access tactics we simulate with breach attack simulation.
In the case of Picus specifically, how do you decide what kind of files to attach for that sort of thing?
We have a large library of threats. In that threat library, we have a lot of malware samples. For example, yesterday, CISA released an adversary on Interlock ransomware. It's a popular ransomware that is targeting North American and European companies and organizations. We analyzed that adversary and came up, collected the malware samples from open source malware repositories like VirusTotal and other stuff, other places, and we incorporated that malware sample in different attack vectors. For example, we can use malware download attacks with network infiltration module, and we can also attach that malware into an email and simulate email attack vector in your environment.
There is a lot of questions coming up. I'm going to go ahead and just cherry pick the last one. There's some questions about what do you need to get this working? Like, what's the level of competency that your SOC needs to have? Like, do you need to have like a level 3 analyst perform these types of operations, or, can anyone on your SOC team be able to, deploy and use this type of capability?
We have two different kind of attack simulation capabilities. One is with agents, with other one is agentless. With agents-based simulation, we deploy an agent in your environment, and we try to reach that agent from outside. For example, with the network infiltration case, we are trying to download malware to that agent, so we can check whether it can reach, whether that malware can reach to that agent. If it's blocked in the way, we say that you are able to prevent that kind of attack vector. However, if we can download malware into your environment and to our agent machine, we can say that you failed to prevent that kind of attack, and it's possible that malware delivery is possible in your environment.
And there's another one that just came through as well. It's, can you do breach and attack simulation via SMS or smishing?
Not in this capability. However, it's just another attack vector. For example, if you are trying to deliver malware into enterprise network, whether it is via mobile, or endpoint, it depends on if your security controls, your firewalls and other network security devices are able to detect, analyze packages and detect malware samples in those packages. And it's just another initial access vector for us. So it's possible we can simulate that, but currently we do not support mobile.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. And, there's a lot of opportunities when it comes across, from email to SMS. Deepfakes is turning into a wild piece of spaghetti that is infecting us in social media, email, SMS, really everywhere. John, I wanted to throw some things over to you. Have you used breach and attack simulation from a red team perspective, from a Pentest perspective? What's been your exposure to the space of breach and attack simulation?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where I think it's a very logical solution. Yes, I've used them, and I think it, from what I hear from people and what I've seen myself, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's the same thing that like the door lock example, or if we're talking like one of the examples I use in class is smoke detector, right? Same thing. You could check that, right, more often than you probably do, and like we sit there for years and we're like, that thing hasn't made a noise in a while, right? Maybe I should push the button. Right, we'd all be probably safer if we had a way to push that button more often. The breach and attack simulation tool is pressing every single smoke detector on every single step, right, effectively, of the kill chain over and over and over again. When I think about use cases for a breach and attack simulation, you're all probably familiar with what happened a couple of days ago with the SharePoint vulnerability, right? And so if we're thinking about those kind of situations in continuous, like exposure management, attack surface management type stuff, this is one of those solutions that can potentially tell you and identify like, hey, there is a new thing that is happening. You are potentially exposed to that because you run the software that is there. That software happens to be deployed in a place where maybe it's filtered, or maybe it's exposed directly to the internet. And then as you're looking at these tools, right, and all these findings that are out there, it's going to help you assess the risk of that particular situation versus every other thing that might be going on in your network at any period of time, and make sure it's true, right? And that's where the validation part of it comes in. So it's like being aware of what's there, being able to compare what is there compared to everything else that's also there, and not wasting a bunch of time on it, right? Wondering like if that's a real thing. We all know in a SOC, there's a million false positives that are constantly popping up in a lot of situations that just drive people insane. And so that tool strikes at the heart of a lot of those various problems. And it helps us like have a really tight feedback loop, right, with our environment, and understand as soon as something changes, we're going to know about it like as soon as possible, and order all of those things in a meaningful priority and make sure they're actually real.
So where does the red team fit into this? Because like, we talked about penetration testing and purple teaming. What about red teaming?
Mm-hmm. In breach attack simulation, you can create your own red teaming scenarios. Currently, in the threat library, we have around 30,000 attack samples. So you can use them as Lego blocks and create your own attack campaign. So it can do the attack campaign for you, and you only set up the campaign, and you leave the execution to breach attack simulation. So as John said, it's trying to push every smoke detector button so it can do the automation for you. With as we mentioned in the Pentest case, good pentesters are hard to find, but however, each pentester have their own expertise. For example, you have web application pentesters, you have mobile application pentesters. With breach attack simulation, you combine all of those capabilities into one tool and let it decide to run continuously. So you cannot deploy 30,000 attack campaigns in your environment with human pen testers. However, with automation, you can deploy it and get your results very fast and very accurately.
Amazing. There's more questions coming in. I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of these. It says, how do you simulate endpoint attacks? How much information do you give to a breach and attack simulation tool about your specified target? I would imagine that might depend on what you're validating and the red team test, but we'd love to hear both of you all's perspective on how much information to provide about the target when doing breach and attack simulation.
I mentioned agent-based attack simulations. With endpoint testing, we deploy an endpoint agent in the environment and start the simulation. For example, let's assume that we are running a ransomware simulation. With that case, we are simulating each technique that's used by that simulated ransomware group. For example, we start with a discovery. We try to understand the environment we are in. And after reconnaissance, we try to escalate our privileges and try to impact more devices and spread to more devices with lateral movement. After reaching certain goals, we say that we were able to encrypt a dummy file in your environment, and we raise a flag saying that we were able to compromise that environment with that endpoint attack. In that sense, deploying an agent is a requirement in that case. However, we do not need additional information about your environment because we already do our own reconnaissance on our side.
Gotcha. And John, any perspective on, from your perspective, when you are doing a pen test or a red team engagement, a purple team exercise, how much guilty knowledge should you have about the target before being able to truly validate a control?
Yeah, so the more information you have, the better, right? Certainly, the more time you spend in that research phase when you're doing a pen test, the more complete the test is going to be, the more realistic the test may be, the more things it might uncover that it might otherwise miss. So certainly, all of those things are important there. Um, Back to what we were talking about before on the scoping thing, right? The more that's in scope, the more that there is to research, the more you can spend time, and the more you're going to spend money paying for that kind of thing to happen, right? So when you have something like this that is a more automated solution that can gather some of that information, has an internal perspective because it's running as an agent on the device, a lot of that gets short-circuited, right? And what is happening is, an automatic assessment of a lot of these things versus how a human might do it. So certainly, like, there could be potential trade-off there, depending on how the implementation is happening on either side. But the ability to get through some of those more time-intense and also expensive parts of a pen test in an automated fashion can be a huge benefit when it comes to breach and attack simulation, purple teaming, and all these other kind of things as well.
So there's another one that came in. This one might be for you, John Yüceel. Can you do web and API testing through Picus?
Yeah, certainly. We have in the threat library, we have exploit samples in our environment, and depending on the agent you deploy and the endpoint you deploy, we can run attack simulations on that scenario. And for example, a few days ago, we had a SharePoint vulnerability. We created exploit samples from that vulnerability and deployed into our environment. So you can choose your agent and run the attack simulation on that environment, do the pen test itself. With breach attack simulation, it's more atomic. With automated pen testing, we try to chain multiple vulnerabilities and try to exploit the entire environment and create more impact in the environment. So it's more atomic with breach attack simulation, more real life like with automated pen testing.
Understood. Man, there's so many different things that come to mind when it comes to breach and attack simulation, especially in the world that we're starting to venture off into when it comes to artificial intelligence and large language models. I'm sure you both have done research in this space. Maybe there's been some innovation that either of you have reviewed or been part of, but wanted to see, where does the current state of AI and LLMs fit into offensive SOC and breach and attack simulation?
So I can jump in on that. I have not seen a ton of information going in that specific direction yet. And as we mentioned, right, the idea of this offensive SOC is a little bit new anyway. And like I mentioned, I see some questions around this, right? Like, who is actually doing this? What's actually going on? How is this different from an internal red team? That's a question asked from Alan Williams a while back. The offensive SOC, right? Like, this is a thing that can be implemented in multiple ways. So it doesn't have to be different than an internal red team. It's just a different trigger to get the red team going and like tell them what to do, right? So if we're thinking about the capabilities of AI, one of the things that AI is best at is taking large amounts of data, summarizing it, and coming up with some kind of analysis and synthesis of it. Well, what are we looking at when we're looking at a network that is massive and has a potential ton of opportunities on what to look at? If I was imagining what I would use an LLM for here, although I haven't seen it done yet, is like take the kinds of things that we're talking about here and then rank order them using an LLM, saying like, some kind of complex prompt where it's like, here's the context, here's the network, here's the business critical applications, give all the stuff that's important so that the LLM knows what matters. And then here are the findings that we have right now, compare them to other findings. Pen testers, these are the things that, the LLM suggests might be the most fruitful avenues to explore as some of those things that might be unseen by the average, blue teamer or otherwise, or just stuff that's going to fall between the cracks more likely and have an outsized impact if that were to be hit. That would be my thought on that.
I think AI is not equal in the ingenuity level. Humans more creative in that sense. If we are looking for scale, AI and automation is much better than humans. However, to create unique attack campaigns or create new attack vectors, humans are still leading on that front. So with AI and with breach and attack simulation, we are trying to take the heavy lifting from humans, and we are opening up space for more ingenious ideas from the red teamers. We are not trying to replace red teamers or pen testers or defenders with automation or AI. We are trying to do the heavy lifting, and we are trying to saying that you do the unique part, you do the human part, and we can scale that at multiples, so we can run automation 24 hours. However, if we need something unique, we are still using human red teamers on our team, and we are still relying on those on their capabilities. And also in our research, at the beginning of the year, we analyzed over 1 million malware samples. We saw that AI is great at scaling. However, it's not creating new attack vectors. It's using and scaling that already exists. It doesn't create a new one.
Right. There's nothing like a human in the loop. I think that, what we see with AI, it kind of showcases that, like, the more feedback and context that you can give it, like John mentioned, the better that it is. But if you don't give it all the context that it needs, it's not going to be able to innovate because the memory isn't as good as ours right now. But there's other ways that you can outsource some help beyond just AI. And someone brought it up in the chat. They said bug bounty programs. I would imagine that with the bug bounty program, that would be more for things that are likely exposed to the external internet. And that could be in addition to breach and attack simulation. But wanted to see, do those go hand in hand from your perspective, John Yüceel?
Actually, recently I read a vulnerability report about application, and the author of it tried to identify the bug and the vulnerability with AI without human interaction. He tried to diff the patches and tried to identify the vulnerability and what's patched. So if it's possible, and it was possible on that article, it's also possible to automate testing and using AI in bug bounty programs. However, bug bounty programs are here to identify what is unique in regards of the vulnerabilities. If you are able to automate testing and identifying bugs with automation, so do the vendors and the software developers. So in that regard, it will be a short-lived session, I guess, for bug bounters.
We got another one from MBE that just came in. It says, do you allow for customers to create custom scenarios as part of breach and attack simulation? What language are the scenarios written in? How do you account for EDR flagging the breach and attack simulation binary?
We have 3 questions in one. So yep. Let's start with the first one. We allow our customers to deploy their own custom scenarios. They can deploy their malware download scenarios or endpoint scenarios and create complex attack campaigns with BAS and automate that. That's the answer to the first one. And we allow any scripting languages in the environment because think of it like a remote access to the agent. So if Python is available on that endpoint, you can use Python, you can use PowerShell or Ruby, whatever you like. So we do not have any language restriction in that regard. And also our agents are signed binaries, so they are not flagged by EDRs. However, if you have an issue, we always keep it updated, so no flagging.
Perfect. You answered another one that was right above it as well. Do you need to install the agent for pen testing / breach and attack simulation?
Yeah. You need to deploy an agent. However, we have agentless attack simulations, but with agent-based simulation, you can ensure more capable attack scenarios. We are limited with agent-based agentless attack simulations because, for example, for volume download attacks, we can use your own browser as an agent, so you do not need to deploy any agent in your environment, and we can use the browser as an agent. However, it's much more limited. For example, you cannot run endpoint attacks because in that case, we need to break out of the confines of the browser and deploy attack commands for endpoint attacks. So it's not for agent-based. It's much more capable. However, it's possible to do agentless.
Perfect. We are actually getting low on time, so I want to give everyone an opportunity to bring any of their last questions up. There's a little flag that just popped up at the top that said, Ron, you need to hurry up. You got 15 minutes left. So wanted to throw that out there. Drop your questions into the chat/Q&A section, and we'll be bringing them up. I wanted to get a forward look on the future from you all. I know that you all have magical crystal balls. That's how you got to where you're at, because you made some very great bets on what would happen in the landscape of cybersecurity. But where are we going when it comes to the offensive SOC? You look at 2025, wrapping up 2026. What are some of those things that you're going to be paying attention to, but also investigating in the years to come? Let's start with you, John Hubbard.
Yeah, definitely AI, right? That's the easy answer, but it's the true answer. There are so many opportunities for AI in a SOC. It's just unbelievable. We're at the stage right now where we're just trying to figure out, like, of all the things it can be used for, like, where do we start and what is it the best at? And so, like, clearly there's connections to what we're talking about here, but really across the board, I think it's going to amplify what people are able to do in terms of analysis and in terms of identifying risk and in terms of just making calls, on a day-to-day basis, threat hunting hypotheses and everything. And specifically here, what I'm excited about is kind of what I mentioned before, is just the ability to take this amount of data and make better sense of it. I know in my previous role, I was working at a company that had 150,000 endpoints. And so when you're looking at something like at that scale, hopefully you can look through the list of things that you might want to deal with, but without some kind of way of being really good about prioritization and being sure that it's getting it right, you might pay attention to the wrong thing. And security operations is a game of priorities and resource balancing, right? And so AI is going to allow us to both move faster, make better decisions, and then teaming that up with tools like this that can validate this for us. I think, the blue team tool set is clearly maturing. You can look at surveys out there on how long it's been taking, in the past versus now to catch the average attack on an endpoint. The Mandiant M-Trends report is one report I always look at that tracks that number. It went from 400 days back about, I think it was 2011, it was 416 days. Now we're down to 10 days average. So clearly these tools are making a difference. And what I think is in the future is defenders are going to continue to close that gap. We've got better tools. We have automation. The automation is maturing. We have automation that is now finding the problems faster than attackers can find the problems. And all of that is just going to continue to get better, and AI is throwing fuel on that fire.
Mm-hmm. What about you, John Yüceel? What's on your roadmap? You look in your magical crystal ball. What should we expect from offensive SOC?
I agree with John. I think AI will be a centerpiece of our future. Like smartphones, like social media, it will be part of our lives as daily users of technology and also cybersecurity professionals. I believe in the future we will focus more on prioritization because we have too many fires that we cannot kill with our resources. So it's hard for us to catch every bug and fix everything. We will be getting better at prioritization, so we can focus what's need to be fixed first. At the moment, we have things like CVSS to list bunch of vulnerabilities and deal with the most severe one first. However, I think in the future, with the expansion of offensive capabilities, we will be able to identify much more pressing vulnerabilities first. For example, in the future, there will be a low CVSS scored vulnerability that will be delivering the final blow to your environment. So we will be getting better at identifying those kind of vulnerabilities and fix them first. I think in the short run, we will get better at prioritization. In the long run, AI will be the centerpiece of our daily lives and work lives also.
Add to that one thing. One thing I just saw on that, there was an article a couple of days ago on how Google's models were able to find an exploit and like get it patched before it became an exploit. So like attack surface management may, has anyone ever seen the movie Minority Report? Where they're like reading people's minds and they're going to commit crimes before those people even know they're going to commit the crimes. If we have AI that can look at our software and predict that, hey, this is going to be a vulnerability that can be exploited, right? That backs us up as defenders even further way ahead of attackers. And before that exploit even becomes viable, we can say like, nope, we're not deploying that. We can see this. And like, certainly we're doing that now in plenty of ways, like doing code checks, but this could take it even further, right? And get even further back in the cycle, which would be great.
Now it's time for some questions, and there's some good ones that have come up, especially on this, direct topic that we're talking about when it comes to getting help from AI. Some of us don't manage our own SOC, like we need the help from partners. There's MSPs out there, and someone asked, we depend on an MSP who maintains a SOC for us. How can we ensure that the SOC that they're maintaining is an offensive SOC? Can they use Picus as part of them being our MSP?
We have a lot of MSP and MSSP customers. And with Picus, what's the great about is it can deploy at scale. So we can serve multiple customers at once, depending on the agent you deploy. So we do not. We can deploy multiple agents at multiple points, so your MSP or MSSP can manage the multiple customers at once. So it's possible. And if you are more interested in Picus, you can inform your MSSP about us.
Hey, that would be amazing. I would recommend that as well. Like you mentioned, they can service multiple clients. I've used MSPs. I love the idea of getting help. You definitely need help, especially in this type of arena. The next question asks, how can you use breach and attack simulation for agentless devices like IoT, maybe even cloud containers? How do you use strategies like breach and attack simulation for agentless devices?
Lately, I'm more focused on OT attacks recently, and what I saw in those kind of attacks is that almost always the initial access is through IT. If you are not opening up your IoT devices to the public internet, you often do not see initial access on those devices. So you need to secure your IT infrastructure first, then deal with the IoT later. It will be much more easier on your end. On IoT specific stuff, we have IoT specific malwares and OT specific malwares in our threat library, and you can simulate those attack campaigns in your environment wherever you deploy the agent. If that malware sample has a lateral movement capabilities and other capabilities, we can say that it can switch to IoT devices or not. We can validate that kind of attack scenario.
John, is there one question I saw scroll by earlier was, where do you actually? I'm paraphrasing here, but like how many agents do you actually need? Is this like you deploy the one agent to do all the tests from one place, or like where do you need an agent and where do you not need an agent for breach and attack simulation?
Depending on the attack campaign, you can deploy agents to all machines if you like. You can deploy one agent to one endpoint and try to reach other endpoints via that agent. So depending on your attack scenario, you do not need to deploy agents to all your machines. However, the ideal case is to deploy one agent to a network segment. So we can test from outside of your domain into your domain. So we can deliver whether we can test that whether you can deliver malware to that endpoint, and by extension you can validate that network segment can be compromised or not. Similar to endpoint, similarly in the endpoint scenario, you can start an attack from one agent, one endpoint, and try to reach other endpoints or other network segments from that agent.
How do people decide which endpoint to like put that agent on? Do you have like a test system, or do you just pick a random actual computer from that network segment? How does that typically done?
You can get support from our team, and they can show you the best case scenario for your environment. Also, there is no limit to deploy agents in our environment. So you can deploy agent to one endpoint and test that day, and later you can deploy another agent to another machine and test that attack scenario next week. So it depends on your time and depends on your curiosity, I guess.
Whenever I join a new organization, I feel like I'm guessing sometimes when it goes to the idea of finding crown jewels. I'm curious, what would be you all's strategy for identifying crown jewels so you can then, do other things on those assets like breach and attack simulation?
My first goal is in an environment from my former Pentest experiences is that you enumerate as much as you can and try to get information from that environment and try to see where you can get a lot of information. For example, after enumeration, you can use certain exploits or certain vulnerabilities to elevate your privileges and try to compromise the entire network. So my first goal would be enumeration, and then later we try to exploit our findings and try to come up with some way to domain admin. With breach attack simulation automated pen testing, we are just mimicking that scenario, but at scale.
I have a defensive side answer to that question. As a SOC, you should be absolutely talking to your constituency and starting with, well, what is the business telling me are the most critical things that we have? Whether that's a system, whether that's a data set, whether that's a network segment, whether that is a group of things, whatever it is, right? You have to start with like, what is the business or the organization telling you like, hey, these are the most important things. And usually that gives you a pretty good scope of what's going on, but you may not have any one person that has the entire picture. So as technical experts in the security team, you have to look at, what they might say is like, hey, it's server A over here. Well, you have to say, well, okay, server A is the thing that holds the crown jewels. Well, how do people access and administer server A? Is it a virtual machine? Are there people who are administering ESXi and therefore they might have like, outside in access from a hypervisor into that system? What are the admin accounts that are allowed to log into that? What are the accounts that are allowed to interface with, back up the data for that? Because if you can back up the data, you can make a copy of the data and then steal the data. And so you start with what the constituency says, but then you have to work your way backwards and say, well, if I wanted to get to that point, who is everyone that has access to log in? What is every system that has a credential, an API key, something that can interface with this system that could potentially destroy, modify, steal any of that data, and then walk your way back? There's an attack or a threat modeling method called attack trees that is something I'm always talking about and teaching because it's the perfect way to do this, right? You start with a disaster and then you work backwards on how is every single way you could get to that disaster. And then as a SOC team, you can design your detections and controls and other things that can get in that way. And also, pertinent to this discussion, you can look at what are your monitoring options for looking for exposure, right? And continuous validation of how are things being accessed and does that change over time? Does that open up a new attack? avenue. And then that's something that can either feed that to your red team, or you can put those scenarios right into your breach and attack simulation tool and say, hey, I want to check this like on a consistent basis to make sure none of this stuff has changed. So it's a trust but verify and a conversation with your organization to figure that kind of stuff out.
100%. And that scenario reminds me of the game Breaches, Backdoors and Breaches yeah, where you pick a random card and you bring a little fun and play into your security operations center. You pick a card and it has a situation like here's how someone gained access. Here's what they're going after. And you sit around with your team and do a little bit of a spoken tabletop and map out how you would defend against that. I think that gives you a little bit of a leg up, especially while you're waiting on the funding from your stakeholders to deploy those resources and acquire a breach and attack simulation tool. Doing things like what John just recommended and also playing that game Backdoors and Breaches, I think is a great way to start the conversation with you and your team while you onboard additional strategies to your security program. Excellent. It looks like we have reached the end. And actually, sorry, there's one more question and I would love to bring it up. If you could share one line of advice for those entering in or who are interested in the offensive side of the house, what would that piece of advice be? Let's start with you, John Hubbard.
Yeah, ask yourself one simple question. If my environment changed in a security relevant and meaningful way, would I know about it? And how would I know about it? And how can I make sure that that is correct along the way?
I think change and vulnerabilities are inevitable. So my ideal question would be whether it can be exploited or not. Because we might have vulnerabilities, however, we have a lot of security controls. Because we are deploying a lot of tools in our environment, expecting that they will be working. For example, vulnerable does not mean exploitable. So for the offensive SOC, we should be able to answer whether it can be exploitable or not, because we will not be able to patch everything. We will not be able to mitigate or fix everything. However, we might be able to block certain payloads to reach us and do the exploitation. So my ideal question for offensive SOC would be, can it be exploited? And try to answer that question with different tools or different tactics.
Appreciate that. Perfect advice. And the audience is saying thank you to you both as well. I want to say thank you to everybody that has joined in today to attend this session. My one piece of advice would be to continuously learn and do your research. We are here today brought to you by Picus Security. They actually dropped 3 resources in the docs section. I would highly, highly, highly recommend checking out each of those 3 resources, learning more about Picus Security, breach and attack simulation, and the offensive SOC. If you haven't done so already, be sure to also follow and write down the name John Hubbard and also John Yüceel. Connect with them, follow them on social, send them an email. These are 2 very kind and hospitable gentlemen. And wanted to say a big thank you to the Picus Security team as well for throwing an amazing event and also including us 3 to be a part of it. So with that, we will see everyone very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.